Also joining us this morning is Dr. Robert D. Holsworth, who will talk about politics. What happened? What does it mean? Bob always gets high conference evaluation marks. He is the founder and president of Virginia Tomorrow. Virginia Tomorrow examines emerging trends in politics, society, and businesses. Bob's observations on national and Virginia politics have appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, New York Times, and numerous other papers and news magazines. Bob also has appeared on most major American television networks, BBC, ITN in Great Britain, and Fuji Television in Japan. He also is a principal in Decide Smart, a new firm focusing on helping leaders, including local government officials. His partners are familiar to many in this room. Please welcome Bob Holsworth back to VACo. Bob.
Thank you. It's always great to be here, and it's particularly great to follow the uplifting presentation of my papers. I'm going to talk about the gubernatorial campaign, what happened in the House, why it happened, and what it means, and some of the challenges that you're going to be facing in local government over the next couple of years from a political perspective as well. But let me begin by saying that we had two gubernatorial elections nationwide last week. We had one in Virginia, and where was the other one? New Jersey. And I just, as an aside, like to say New Jersey was where I grew up, and the people in New Jersey were baffled and perplexed earlier this summer when in Chicago and Illinois they had that prosecution going on where Fitzgerald was indicting the governor of Illinois. And he said that Illinois was the most corrupt state in the country. And the people in New Jersey couldn't believe it. They thought they were number one somewhere. And in fact, a couple of months later, they reclaimed the crown, you might recall, when on one single day they arrested 40 political figures, including a mayor who had been in office 8 days, and 2 rabbis. For selling black market body organs there. So, I always am thankful I moved to Virginia from New Jersey there on that front. But that was also a pretty large signal, what happened there. That was a blue state that Obama carried by 15 points. And the other night it went to the Republicans also. So let me begin my talk here with a subtraction problem. What do you get when you subtract 3,752,000? When you subtract, here's the number you're subtracting from: 3,752,858. And then you subtract from that 1,984,886. Mike, do you have that number?
Not working very fast this morning.
It's 1,767,972. And here are the numbers. The 3,700,000 number, that's the number of people who voted in 2008. 1,984,000, the number of people who voted last week. The 1,767,000 is the number of Virginians who voted in 08 and didn't show up in 09. So elections are always about who shows up and who doesn't show up on that front. And that was one of the more dramatic things that occurred in Virginia over last week. Almost half the people who voted in 08 didn't show up in 09. And in fact, what we've had going in Virginia is this odd situation where in the course of this decade, the turnout in presidential races has increased, while the turnout in gubernatorial races has declined. In 2000, we had a turnout of registered voters of about 68% in the presidential race. In 2004, we had 71%. In 2008, we had 74.9% of the registered voters showed up. The governor's race, very, very different. We had 46% show up in '01, 45% show up in '05, 40.5% show up in 2009. So what you have is that you have two different electorates in Virginia these days. You have the presidential electorate, and then you have the gubernatorial electorate. They're different people showing up at different times. And what was so distressing for the Democrats this time is a lot of people in Democratic-leaning areas had larger declines in turnout than some of the Republican-leaning areas as well. But overall, two very different electorates. And all local officials know that, all elected officials know that as well, because you know who your electorate is when you come up for election. And what you've had is that you've had two very different ones emerging in Virginia, and you can see it there. One of the reasons why a number of Democrats who were elected to Congress in '08 are concerned right now is they're worried about who the electorate is next year. Tom Perriello, in the Albemarle, Charlottesville, down through Martinsville, Danville, he was elected in a period where there was a 75% turnout as a Democrat. Turnout in off-year congressional elections where we don't have the Senate race tends to plummet. It tends to look like the gubernatorial turnout. He's concerned. Glenn Nye in Virginia Beach, he's concerned. And the Republicans now believe they also have a shot at one other congressman in Virginia. Anyone know who that is there? It's Rick Boucher. Their thing is they can find Terry Kilgore to run against Rick Boucher in an off-year election. Maybe they have a shot at that district too, because it voted over 60% for Bob McDonnell the other day. So that's the issue that you always find in elections, is that you have an electorate that's a presidential electorate, you have an electorate that's a gubernatorial electorate, and depending upon when you have your local elections, you may have a local electorate as well. But that's the kind of big numbers that you saw, and the huge dramatic difference in what happened is that little subtraction problem at the beginning. Now, let's talk about each campaign and what the campaigns wanted to do, why they were successful and why they weren't. The Democrats, as you know, they had a three-way sort of primary, a three-way fight for the nomination. Most people thought that one of the winners was going to be either Terry McAuliffe or Brian Moran. But there's a particular dynamic in these three-way primaries. People in my business call it the murder-suicide dynamic. Two people start fighting one another, one kills the other, but in the process harms himself. And that's what happened in this election. Brian Moran was obsessed with Terry McAuliffe. He's coming in as a carpetbagger. He ran these negative commercials about McAuliffe. They were very successful. They drove McAuliffe's numbers down, but they did nothing for Moran. People said, he's a negative guy. And the Washington Post, his hometown paper in some ways, endorsed Creed Deeds. So in the Democratic side, you had this surprise winner emerging from the fact that you had two Democratic candidates in Northern Virginia fighting one another, killing one another off, and Creed Deeds was the last man standing in the primary. Democrats thought maybe he'll be more electable. So Deeds gets the nomination and decides, how is he going to run? How are the Democrats going to run this year?